lowest level in almost 5 years. It's a little bit hard to know how much to take this report at face value because there's still probably some distortions from the recent government shutdown, of course.
Right.
And as Greg points out, there's also evidence that tariff costs may be increasingly passed along to consumers. We've had a few different reports recently from CBO and I think the New York Fed research team finding that consumers are paying most of the tariff costs. And you see that in some of the numbers today. I think Greg mentioned appliances maybe, but you also saw, appliances, furniture, I think new cars all saw pretty sharp price increases in January, probably related to the fact that companies are having to pass along their costs since they can no longer keep absorbing them indefinitely from tariffs.
Right. And Jerome Powell, the Fed chair for now, talked about this last month, saying that the expectation is we'll see the effects of tariffs flowing through goods prices, peaking, and then starting to come down over the course of this year. Greg, how near to the peak do you think we are? And is it surprising that the tariffs haven't shown up more in price increases?
I think we're actually right around the peak, and that, as you suggested, as Powell predicts, that we're going to see less and less of that effect as the year unfolds. And you're right, the tariff impact on inflation has been less than most people would have thought about a year ago. I think the average forecast back then was we'd get about a percentage point of tariff inflation. And in fact, we only got about a half a percentage point. And the good news is that we're probably not going to see tariffs going up any longer. In fact, there's increasing efforts by the Trump administration to pare back tariff increases by cutting deals with particular countries, by reducing them on especially sensitive products. There were reports this week that they're looking to narrow, for example, tariffs on steel and aluminum. And so as the tariff increases that we had last April, May, June recede into the past, they start to also drop out of our inflation numbers. And that would be good news for the inflation rate coming down as we get towards the end of this year.
Catherine, can we talk about shelter inflation, housing for a moment? Because that's a big component of CPI. It was up 3% annually in January, but it has been decelerating, and we know that there's a lag, between rents and home payments falling, and that's showing up in the CPI. What is happening with housing affordability right now?
Well, it depends a little bit on how you define affordability, right? Is affordability about price growth month over month, let's say, or even year over year? Or is it how much accumulated growth we have seen over a period of time, basically the level? And I'm sure people will be glad to know that price growth is decelerating, but it's still growing, quite a bit above where presumably renters would like it to be. If you're a homeowner, and you want those imputed rents, presumably, to be increasing. But
Right.
If you are a renter or if you are a prospective buyer, 3% price growth is still quite painful. So, it would be nice if we see some further deceleration, if we see it get down to, closer to the Fed's target for overall inflation. And we may yet see that. It depends a little bit, of course, on what happens throughout the rest of the economy and in part because if you have inflation overall persistently high, that's going to make it harder for the Fed to cut interest rates and therefore harder for mortgage rates to come down because they are still quite high. I know because I have to refinance soon. So I guess we'll see what happens. But it's a move in the right direction.
All right. Moving on from inflation. Greg, we also had that better than expected jobs report from January this week. What does that tell you about the strength of the economy right now?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two pieces to that jobs report. Now, the first piece of that is that we actually revised a lot of the data from prior years, and we discovered that for the last year and a half, 2 years, the job market has been way weaker than we first thought. For example, last year, we only created around 15,000 jobs per month, which I think might be the lowest rate of job creation in any year in decades outside of recessions. But the good news
Yeah.
is that the last month, January, was actually a pretty good month where we created 130,000 jobs. So even though we've been in this period of very soft to stagnant hiring, there's a few hints out there that things might be picking up. So I suppose you could say it's a glass half empty, half full story on the job market.
And real quick, Catherine, before we go, wage growth outpacing inflation. How are, consumers generally faring right now?
Well, if you ask consumers, they say they're doing very, very badly if you look at consumer sentiment numbers. But yes, those data, amongst others, are more encouraging. Well, both the fact that they are getting more jobs and that there is, stronger wage growth, which is part of the reason why I sort of qualified my affordability answer, because what really matters, whether or not consumers, will articulate it this way, is what's happening to prices relative to what's happening to their wages. Basically, what's happening to real wage growth. That affects what they can literally afford. So yes, good news that we are seeing some strength in wage growth. Will it be enough to perk up consumers, voters' views of the economy? I'm not so convinced.
We'll watch for that. All right. Catherine Rampell is at the Bulwark and MS Now. Greg Ip with the Wall Street Journal. Thanks both so much and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having
Amy.
me.
On Wall Street, a mixed trading day on this Friday the 13th. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. The Trump administration is calling it the largest deregulatory action in history that'll save businesses and consumers money. Scientists and environmental advocates, though, say it's a gift to fossil fuel companies that will make people sicker and less safe. I'm talking about the repeal this week of the endangerment finding. That's the EPA's 2009 decision that planet-warming greenhouse gases are a threat to public health and welfare, and it underpins the agency's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The administration claims the repeal will save more than $1 trillion in regulatory costs and make cars and trucks more affordable. But as Marketplace's Kaylee Wells reports, climate change is expensive too.
The EPA's argument is, by no longer considering the human harm caused by emissions, taxpayers will save $1.3 trillion in energy and transportation. Cars will be $2,400 cheaper to make, according to the agency, and taxpayer money won't go toward regulating the industry. Environment and politics professor Dana R. Fisher at American University is not convinced.
I'm going to call BS on that. I mean, more like straight up BS.
She says regardless of the EPA's new policy, human harm is still happening. More planet-warming emissions makes more extreme weather, like worsening fires, floods, and heat waves.
That not only costs people in terms of loss of labor because people can't work outside or they can't work as effectively, or when they do work outside, they get sick, but it also will cost lives.
She says she doesn't want to put a dollar amount on that. But even if we only focus on transportation, there are hidden costs to the cheaper cars, too. UCLA environmental law professor Ann Carlson is the former acting administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
If consumers are purchasing less fuel-efficient vehicles, then we're using more gasoline.
Which means higher gasoline costs. And as other countries look to buy more efficient and electric cars,
our manufacturers are going to fall behind.
On top of that, the cheaper cars might not come at all. Akshay Jha teaches economics and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University and says companies are facing what he calls regulatory whiplash.
Companies are making long-run investment decisions, not based on what policy is today, but based on what they think policy might be over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Same goes for power plants, Jha says, especially since new clean energy is cheaper anyway.
I doubt anybody's going to build a new coal plant just based on this change.
Because by removing regulations, you create uncertainty. And less certainty means companies might wait to make these investments that would save consumers money. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
It's getting harder to find a primary care doctor in this country, maybe you've noticed. And one reason is that a growing number of them are going into concierge medicine, meaning they charge patients a flat fee, a couple $1,000s a year or more, to be part of their practice. These doctors are still a minority, but between 2018 and 2023, the number of practices charging an annual fee almost doubled, according to a study from Harvard. Concierge doctors still bill insurance too, but charging that annual fee means they can afford to see fewer patients and gives the ones that they do see more time and attention. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has our story.
When John Sidlecki first started working as a primary care doctor almost 30 years ago, he loved it.
It was great the first 5 years in practice. You would have hour physicals with patients.
But a lot has changed since then, and not in a good way.
The patients you're taking care of now tend to be older, sicker. They take more time.
Yet primary care doctors have less time now. One big reason for that is reimbursement rates have declined over the years. So doctors make less money now per patient than they used to.
And so there's more pressure to see more patients who are more complicated. And so it tends to lead to a lot of burnout amongst providers.
That is what ultimately drove Sidlecki to go concierge 2 years ago. He was burned out, seeing about 25 patients a day at his private practice near Richmond, Virginia. And then his partner retired, which left him as the only doctor. It wasn't sustainable. Shantanu Nundy, a primary care doctor near Washington, D.C., is not concierge, but says he hears versions of this from colleagues all the time now.
I get this phone call at least monthly from people, who are saying, hey, what do you think about concierge medicine? Should I consider it?
Almost everyone he knows who is considering it is just hitting a wall in traditional practice, overwhelmed by the relentless pace, paperwork, and insurance demands. But he says doctors are also torn about turning to the concierge model.
I think on one end, they want to do it for the right reasons, which is, hey, I want to just get back to taking care of patients. And on the other side, they're going to be taking care of a lot less patients. And doesn't that mean that more patients aren't going to have doctors?
There's already a shortage of primary care doctors in the U.S., particularly in rural areas.
And so, absolutely, there's a theoretical risk that as more doctors go into concierge medicine, that means that the burden on the remaining physicians is higher and higher.
And that it's harder for patients who can't afford the fees or don't want to pay them to find a new doctor. When Katie Wang got an email a few years ago that her longtime primary care doctor in New York City was going concierge, she was disappointed.
I really liked my doctor, really trusted her, and didn't want to go and find somebody else.
But she didn't really want to shell out $2,000 a year to stay either. Then she found a lump in her breast.
I decided, well, if this lump is something significant, then this is not really the time to be looking for a new physician, right?
The lump was significant. Wang had breast cancer. So she paid the $2,000 and stuck with her doctor. And she says she's actually seen a big difference since the practice went concierge.
I mean, huge difference. Previously it would be 10 minutes maybe in and out kind of a thing. Now she has more time to spend with me. So to me, it was completely worth it in that regard. I feel like I'm getting much better care.
That's possible with concierge practices because doctors have many fewer patients. Before Dr. John Sidlecki switched his practice over, he had 3,800 people on his roster. Now he's down to 600.
Morally, you still want to take care of all these folks who have trusted you and pay to come see you, and you get to know them and their families. And so that's the difficulty in the decision when you have to sever some of those relationships.
He also worries about how many doctors are going concierge near him in Richmond and the pressure that puts on an already strained healthcare system. But for Sidlecki personally, it was the right choice.
No question. I would absolutely do it again. I am more rested. I am not as stressed. I am absolutely practicing medicine the way I feel it should be practiced and the way I want to practice.
Spending more time and taking better care of patients. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
Coming up.
So it's an ongoing conversation between all sort of elements of the weather system.
All systems go. But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 48 points, 0.1%, to close at 49,500. The Nasdaq dipped 50 points, 0.2%, to finish at 22,546. And the S&P 500 added a mere 3 points to end at 6836. For the week, the Dow slipped 1 0.2%. The Nasdaq lost 2 0.1%. The S&P 500 subtracted 1 0.4%. Kaylee Wells talked about the EPA scrapping emissions regulations. Well, General Motors Company grew 1 0.4%. Ford Motor Company picked up 1 0.9%. But electric car maker Rivian Automotive, on the heels of a sunny fourth quarter earnings report, soared 26 0.6%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by The Economist, providing reporting and analysis on global politics, economics, science, and culture, covering international trends and emerging issues shaping the world today. More information at economist.com. And by Revenued, providing working capital for businesses whose cash flow is holding them back. Revenued approves businesses based on revenue, not credit, and funds can be approved and available in just one day. Visit getrevenued.com. And by JLL, helping businesses achieve goals through commercial real estate. From market insights to talent retention to finding the right place for businesses to grow, JLL is there. JLL, see a brighter way.
WNYC is independent public media, here to serve you and our entire community. We're listener-supported and proud of it. Financial contributions from listeners like you make our work possible. When you give to WNYC, you're helping to fund the news you count on and the conversations yet to come. Please become a member now. Just visit WNYC.org and click on Donate.
WNYC is supported by the Joyce Theatre, presenting Trinity Irish Dance Company. The Chicago-based company returns with a world premiere by Michelle Dorrance, original live music, and more, February 17th through 22nd. Tickets at joyce.org.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, the Department of Homeland Security is on track to shut down tonight after Congress left town without a deal to fund the department. We're going to have that story and much more at 7 o'clock. Stay tuned.
This is Marketplace. I'm Amy Scott. Totally hypothetical, but let's say your kid has a soccer tournament coming up. It's a couple weeks away, and you want to know, how cold and windy is it going to be? Could it get rained out? Typically, you're not going to get a reliable forecast more than 7 to 10 days out. However, AI might have something to say about that. Tim Fernholz wrote for Bloomberg about how researchers and tech giants are developing new forecasting tools that could change the game. Tim, welcome to the program.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get to AI, talk about how weather forecasting traditionally has worked.
So I won't say traditionally, because it's been an expanding field for the last few decades. But in contemporary times, we basically have a government-run system that collects data from all kinds of sensors all over the world, weather balloons, buoys. Every commercial plane in the United States coming down is sharing its measurements with the National Weather Service. And the National Weather Service has a huge supercomputer, and it plugs all of that information into it, and it goes through these scientific models that meteorologists have spent generations building and spits out a forecast. And it's a very complex and expensive process, and it's been refined, and now we have pretty good weather forecasts out, say, 10 days.
So enter AI. How is that changing?
So now we have deep learning software models where we can feed data from the weather agencies into them and ask them to do forecasts. And it turns out they're actually able to predict the weather better than the traditional way we have done it. And then in particular, these models are very good at doing things like tracking hurricanes, tracking cold fronts that are trickier for the traditional models to do. And so scientists are trying to figure out why exactly they can do this, because you have to sort of understand why it works in order to implement it in a useful way.
Yeah, it was kind of wild to me to read that they don't really understand what's happening. Is that worrying? Or as long as it works, is it okay if the people don't really understand how the AI is doing this?
Well, you hear two approaches to that. One is if it works, and we should use it. But what is interesting is that if we understand how it works, we can use it to learn more about the atmosphere itself. These technologies are very new. Only in 2022 did we first start to see these models coming out. And they are an opportunity to learn. And like a lot of artificial intelligence models, they create a very complex way of managing data that's sort of hard to peer into at first. And just like with the LLMs and other forms of this technology, there's a lot to learn about what actually is happening. And then can we take that and use that to learn more about science?
So this is obviously potentially life-saving, money-saving technology. What do you think about private companies being the ones to really innovate here?
Well, it's certainly part of the trend we're seeing. So many of the advances in deep learning technology are coming from the private sector because it takes a huge amount of money to train these models, to get the data centers all going. But once they are trained, they're actually incredibly cheap and portable. And so there is a sense in the meteorology community that this is going to democratize access to weather forecasts. And it's also important to say that right now, these models, while they are outperforming their government equivalents, they're still dependent on the data that is generated by the governments. So for now, there's a very intense symbiosis between both sides.
So where are we now in terms of the rollout of this technology? Is my weather forecast on my phone incorporating AI yet?
If you're using Google, yes, it is. Google has been feeding data from its weather model into some of its products. If you are in Europe, you may see it in your daily forecasts because the Europeans are much further ahead of the United States. But even in December, the National Weather Service rolled out some AI models of its own that are going to start contributing to forecasts.
How much better do you think this can get in the near term? I mean, could I know if my daughter's soccer game is going to be on, in 2 weeks?
The most important question. It's hard to say how quickly this will take effect. But what these experiments reveal is that there is a lot of potential to extend weather forecasting out to perhaps even a month in the future. They haven't quite figured out how to do it yet, but they can see the potential path towards it. And so as these models continue to be refined, they will point us towards better forecasts, but they will also perhaps point us towards where we need to invest more in data collection to improve the data we're putting into them to get better forecasts, and also where we can tweak the traditional models to get better results from them. So it's an ongoing conversation between all sort of elements of the weather system and how we improve the forecasts we're getting.
Tim Fernholz had the story for Bloomberg. He's now a reporter at TechCrunch covering AI in space. We'll definitely have to follow up with you about that. Tim, thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Marketplace is supported by GEP, at the forefront of agentic procurement orchestration and autonomous supply chains. With GEP Smart Software, GEP Key Agentic AI, and Strategy Consulting, GEP works to help business optimize value and reduce risk. And by Solidigm, offering solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI with higher capacities, greater speed, and energy efficiency. Solidigm, AI data infrastructure built on a solid foundation. Learn more at storageforai.com.
This final note on the way out today. Much of the Department of Homeland Security is set to shut down early tomorrow after Congress left for recess without a deal on new restrictions for federal immigration agents. The Washington Post reports a shutdown would affect about 13% of the federal workforce, including FEMA and the TSA. Though ICE and Customs and Border Protection, the targets of these proposed reforms, can continue operating thanks to billions of dollars from last summer's Republican tax and spending law. Our theme music was composed by BJ Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Joanne Griffith is the chief content officer. Neil Scarborough is the vice president and general manager. And I'm Amy Scott. Have a good holiday weekend. We will be back on Monday. This is APM.